First of all, I'd just like to check if any one of us left our privilege at the door. Did we? Did we? All right. It's going to be a tad uncomfortable, and it's going to also be a time for us to engage and to think around our own. Winnie is not here yet. Our own bullshit. All right. We have an audience engagement, so I'd like for you to engage using the QR code. Renata, are you going to take us through that, please?
Yes. Okay, I'd like everyone to bring out your phones at this point. We usually tell people to put their phones away, but we want you to be part of the conversation. And we have a few questions just to get to know all of you better. We have our people online as well and in the room. So if you can scan the QR code or go on to mentimeter.com and enter the code. And please press a thumbs up so we know that you have joined in. Once we reach about 40, then I'll start the slides. Okay, we're halfway there, 23. Okay, so on your phones, can you pin where you are from? We'd like to have a understanding where everyone is connecting in today, whether online or here in the room.
Oh, wow.
Hope your geography is good.
South Africa, we there under.
It's lovely to see how diverse we are in the room and also online. I can see a few pins from where I'm from in the ocean in Australia. Okay. So what's the first word that comes to mind when you hear decolonialization?
Freedom?
Freedom seems to be a common theme here. We have justice, equality, accountability, power, liberty, excess, dignity, flexibility. Okay, next question. How familiar are you with the concepts of decolonization and anti-racism? You can see we have a lot of experts. Okay, next question. In your own words, what does colonialization mean in the context of global development? And I just want to make a little announcement right now. If you do not consent to getting your photos taken, please put your hands up. If you do not consent, those in the room. Okay, I do not see anyone's hands up, so we're all good. So we have transfer, multilateralism, flexible funding and equal pay, self-support, sustainability, resetting, self-reliance, phasing out, power distribution, resource allocation, respect other people, values and laws. It is non-negotiable, challenging the ways we work, how we fund, and how we interact with each other. Okay, next question. How important do you think it is to address anti-racism in global development efforts on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being not important, 10 being very important. So there's a general consensus that it's more on the very important side. Okay, what do you think is the biggest challenge in implementing decolonization practices in global development? Is it a lack of awareness, resistance to change, institutional barriers? Okay, another map here. Which regions do you think have pressing issues related to decolonization in global development? So we see Africa, there's Europe, we have the Pacific Ocean, interesting, North America, yeah. We have Central Asia and Eastern Europe and Asia. All right. And this is for later on after we are done listening from our panelists today, and I will hand over back to Yvette. So if you have any questions, we will keep this slide open for people to contribute. Thank you so much, and over to you, Yvette.
Thank you so much. I saw on one of the answers how many of us who thinks we need to address racism, and it was almost 100%. So if that was the case, we wouldn't need this session. I think there's a great say-do gap, what we say and what we actually do. That is why I requested for us to leave the untruths at the door. So up next, we will have a presentation by Dr. Malia Khan on racism, on how Women Deliver is becoming a non-racist organization. And because of time and us wanting to engage with our panelists as well as our speakers, I think we will ask Dr. Malia Khan to just introduce herself shortly in a few words, and then we can go over to the presentation. Thank you so much, and welcome, Malia.
Thank you, Yvette, and thank you everybody who's in the room. First of all, my apologies for not being there in person. I very much wanted to, but I had a long scheduled family vacation. So I'm speaking to you from California right now, but I felt this was very important and I wanted to be here specifically for this topic. So in terms of introduction, let me introduce myself in a way that I don't usually do. I am the president and CEO of Women Deliver. I've been the CEO for 2 years. But in addition to that, I am also a Pakistani. I'm an immigrant. I immigrated to the US and then the UK subsequently from there. I am from the global South. I am a woman of color who's in a leadership position, and I am also identify as queer. So with all of those identities, I think, you know, the lived experience of having spent many years working in this sector is something I'm bringing to this discussion. So I wanted to start the conversation by saying that the only way we can decolonize the sector is by first starting with decolonizing ourselves. And I think we often look outside our own organizations and institutions, and we look at the structures that exist within the global health sector and what is happening in our society, what is happening in the global systems. And we rightly question those and question the colonialism and the racism that exists there. But I want to speak about the colonial that our own organizations and institutions are also a product of these larger structures of racism and colonialism, and so therefore have very much the same practices embedded in those. Many of you might be familiar with Women Deliver, but it's a global advocacy organization, most known for the largest gathering on gender equality. That's the Women Deliver conference that's held every 3 years. In 2020, Women Deliver, like many other organizations, went through its own sort of reckoning in the context of Black Lives Matter and the understanding that emerged from that. There was a very public calling out of the leadership of Women Deliver, accusing the leadership of being racist, of having colonial practices, and of not considering the lived realities of many of their racial, gender, and sexual minorities within the organization. And I want to speak very openly about what happened there, because I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Women Deliver was by far not the only organizations that had similar practices and structures in place within the organization. It was one of the few organizations that did, though, go through a very public reckoning, which many heard about and many saw what was happening. And since then, in these last 4 years, I like to think that the organization has profoundly changed, although there's still a lot more left to do. A journey of decolonization and anti-racism, to me, is a continuing journey and something that we can aspire to, but we don't quite ever reach, because I think there's higher and higher standards that we can be putting in place. Women Deliver's journey over the last 4 years has really gone through 3 stages. The first stage was that of like I said before, the very public reckoning, the calling out of its practices, the calling out of its leadership, the fact that it wasn't recognizing the needs and lived realities of many of its minority staff, but then also how that reflected in its own work. Now, that was the profoundly public process that the organization went through. And like I said, many others were going through it, but just in a slightly more private way. The second phase, and that is a relatively short-lived, that first phase is relatively short-lived. The second phase that the organization went through was from, say, 2021 to 22 for a course of about a year and a half to 2 years. And that was the reconciliation. And I think many organizations have also gone through that. This is where we have the very open discussions, we surface the issues of racism for the first time, and many of the staff confront their own privileges, their own backgrounds. Many, even those that are coming from the global south or from minorities, recognize often for the first time how profound those experiences of racism, of discrimination, etc., have been. And there's often conversations, there's experts that are called in, and then some small minor changes start to happen within the organization. The really, really important part, though, I believe, comes after that. And that's when you have a profound transformation of the organization itself. And that can only come once you've gone through the reckoning and the reconciliation within the organization, because power doesn't like to change itself, right? And as Yvette said so correctly, if 100% of us really believe that confronting racism was so important, then we wouldn't need to have these panels and we wouldn't need to have these public processes. But after the reconciliation comes what I call the transformation. This is when the organization has been shaken to its core. It really wants to question at a very, very fundamental level what it is as an organization, why it exists, and even get down to the point of should it exist at all. And I think only then can it go through this transformation and really start to question the profound systems that come from a racist and colonial setting. Women Deliver, what we looked at in order to do this transformation, we looked at three things in sort of interconnected but slightly different ways. And these three things were: one, we looked at our work, our programming. What is it that we do? And the questions to ask there were, why do we do things the way that we do? For instance, at Women Deliver, we hold a large, the largest convening on gender equality that happens in the world. Why do we do the Women Deliver conference in the ways that it's done? Are there different ways of being able to hold it? Whose voices should be centered there? Who makes the decisions around the way that the conference is structured? What topics are raised? How does those decisions matter? And who gets visibility in those spaces? All of these are incredibly important questions to ask. And I think we can't really start to ask those until we're ready to make some very deep changes. So that was the first thing that we sat down and did. As we were going through that process, we also recognized that actually our narrative, the fundamental bedrock on which we exist as an organization, the ways we talk about ourselves, our origin story, what we say we try to do, all those narratives are also coming from that same colonial past. Words matter, and it's very, very important to really question the types of words that you use and why you use them. And so we went through a whole review and change of our narrative. So if you look at how Women Deliver used to describe itself, describe its work, the language is used to use in the documents, over the last few years, we've decided to profoundly change that. I also believe that many organizations hide behind words. They use words without understanding what they truly mean. And so having a real discussion around narrative is very important. The last one, which we're still trying to undergo and is by far the most difficult one to undertake, and I'm sure many others will also reflect on this, is our business model. International development is predicated on a colonial business model, where we're based, where we're registered, what our pay structures are, what our recruitment policies are, who gets promoted, on what basis. All of these things are very, northern based. They're very coming from a colonial mindset, and changing them takes a very, very long time. It's very expensive. There aren't a lot of models out there. And frankly, this is the piece that actually makes boards or the structures that hold us accountable very, very nervous. And it's the same at Women Deliver. So that's a process that we're still undergoing. We're still trying to change our business model. But I do believe that until we do that, until we become an organization that can employ people globally in an equitable way without there being differences in pay, differences in access, differences in who can get visas, who can be employed at various different places, I don't think we'll be able to really fundamentally change as an organization. The two other things I just wanted to put out there, and I hope the other panel members can take this up as a part of the discussion. We do talk about racism, but in our sector, I do think that, you know, one of the profound things that we don't quite get to is the really deep-rooted and quite destructive effect of white feminism. And I think we've all heard about it, we've started to read about it, but we don't understand the manifestations that that has in our own work. Again, the language we use, the predominance and high structure or thing of how people speak, the privilege that's given to the written word, but not just the written word, but specific ways of writing. And if you're not trained in those, if you don't follow those, then your ideas, your lived experiences are discounted. The last thing that we don't often confront, and I'll put this out there, and I've started to talk about this more, and at Women Deliver, we are trying to do more and more work around this, is the profoundly heteronormative nature of our institutions and our structures in our industry. We are able to confront sexual and gender minorities as affects the populations that we work with. We're much more comfortable about that than we are about confronting it within our own sector. Are we able to give equal opportunities to gender and sexual minorities? Have we addressed all the barriers that are in the way of our own organizations and institutions for people to bring their full selves and to be able to thrive and to succeed within the institution? And I'll put out there that I don't think we have, and that's the last frontier that we feel absolutely fine having quite discriminatory policies within our sector around that. I'll stop here, and I'm also happy to sit and listen to the other panelists and to participate. Thank you, Beth.
Yes, thank you so much, Malia. Also, just to recognize the time difference in where you are shows commitment to what we are dealing with. And also just a little nugget, we cannot talk about racism and not acknowledge Palestine. So I'm just saying that. Women of color, leadership and queerness. Yes, women of color, queerness and leadership sometimes feel to me as a curse. I also want to take this opportunity to recognize the women leaders in this room. I'd like to recognize Humile Mashatile. I would like to also recognize Anjali. I would like to recognize our comrade, friend, and leader, Comrade Winnie Byanyima. It's so seldom that we are recognized as women. We say, thank you, Anjali, you are doing a great job. We don't have to say thank you. We just need to bask in. I think patriarchy does it well. Okay, so thank you. Our next speaker is Ace Robinson. Where are you, Ace? And he's going to talk about how do we address internalized racism and queerphobia within the HIV field, from administration to clinical best practices. Ace is a friend, and thank you so much for making time to be here for this very important conversation.
Thank you. So Yvette started the conversation saying we will have some uncomfortable, very direct conversations around the impacts of systemic racism in our lived lives, like as personal individuals trying to do this work, and the communities that we serve. We know secondary traumatic stress is a real thing. When you are coming from the community that is most disproportionately impacted by any illness, you are going to feel it a little different when your client's not getting what they need because you're not getting what you need. And then we go on and have these same conversations about what is the systems, what are the structural pieces that we need to do to address these systems. My name is Ace Robinson. I'm the acting director of the Duke Sexual and Gender Minority Wellness Program, and I'm the founder of Equity is the Word, the people who gave you the food to make sure you eat your food. And so real quick, why start Equity is the Word? It's very quick, same as Dr. Khan was saying. How are we going to have a global organization that's going to address equity in a time limited sense? Because what we're not going to do is have a bunch of people doing capacity building and technical assistance for 25 years. If you've been doing it for 25, if your organization's been at this other organization for 20, 25 years, it's just, you don't know what you're doing, because you should have been able to pass that information on in this amount of time. So we need to stop that and move on to a better way. Great. For those of you who have not met me before, this is my disclosure. It's really simple. I'm Black, I'm queer, and I don't really deal with the bullshit. So terribly sorry. So we'll go quickly. I want to make some time for our conversation. These are the pieces that I think we know, but we want to be very clear. We have about 8 billion people on the planet, right? We have approximately 40 million people living with HIV, and a quarter of those individuals do not have access to sustainable treatment. And then what we're expecting this year is, unfortunately, 600,000 of those people will succumb from HIV-related illnesses. This is a slide from UNAIDS and WHO, just breaking things down. So we know where we are. We know that they said approximately how many people are going to succumb from HIV illnesses. We know there's going to be about 600,000 men who acquire, 500,000 women who acquire, and then 120 children who will acquire HIV at birth. So like when we're having these real conversations about what do we need to do, we need to be very clear on what this looks like and what this does not look like. And there's no reason to mince words, because mincing words is how we got to where we are. And you know, what always bugs me the most is when we have these important conversations around 97% of the room thinks racism is a bad idea, but who's not in this room? Like, you know, like this is not what the leadership looks like of the HIV field. Let's be very clear. And this is the piece that I think is it's hard when you start having these real conversations about like HIV is not a great equalizer. If you are on this planet and you're living with HIV, depending on which study you look at, 73 to 80% of the individuals living with HIV on this planet are of the African diaspora. I come from the US. I'm living in South Africa. I'm living in places where the disproportionate impact of HIV for the Black community is extreme due to the conversations that we're having about racism, all these structural pieces. We see it in microcosms in places like that. And then, like, you know, we go to Brazil, like, you know, it's like if you go to Salvador, it's a different conversation about HIV than if you go to Sao Paulo. Excellent. So this was, I checked, I actually double checked because I did this, I pulled up this information in South Africa. Then I say, oh, maybe it's some weird thing. Let me pull it up in Germany when I'm there to see if I get a different set of pictures. All I did was Google, and you can do this yourself. Google men living with HIV, Google women living with HIV. These are the 4 pictures that 2 for men, 2 for women that pop up. There is actually a very light-skinned Black person here, but this is like the reality of if you're not from our sector and you are not from a country that, if you're not basically from Black Africa, this is what you think of when you're thinking of people living with HIV. Everyone's kind of looks like a model, like on the skinny side. They're light skinned and they're predominantly cisgender. So where does this leave us? So this is a very American-centric slide. So in the United States, Black queer people are disproportionately impacted by HIV. And then when I think about when I was working with the Desmond Tutu Foundation, we had in Cape Town, we were working on an HPTN study that just said, oh, like we were just going to follow gay men not living with HIV for a while. And the study was going on, and there was only 3 participants. And they were like, hey, what's going on? Like, why aren't we recruiting individuals? And then one of the staff, Brian, goes, well, what you're asking for is impossible. You're asking us us to find an out gay person in Cape Town who's not living with HIV. That's just, it doesn't exist. And so, like, you know, when we start having that real conversation, when we're looking at 70-90% of queer individuals in South Africa living with HIV, but this is like back to the US. So like, you know, Black people represent over half of the HIV related deaths. And also on that same side, Black people receive the lowest offer of PrEP and treatment after diagnosis. And so this is a picture of, like, this is person named Tyler, Jeffrey, and Gabriel. They represent in the whole United States, for the people who are actually delivering services and making sure that you're getting treatment and care into the lives of individuals. These are the only Black queer people leading those organizations in the United States of America, even though 40% of the epidemic sits in these exact same communities. So this is a real conversation. Like, I'm a former CEO, and I've dealt with, like, personally have dealt with like the most extreme kinds of racism. Some of it is very storied things that have happened to me. But, you know, when you don't realize what's happening to you and you're just like trying to work because you care about your community. I'll do this real quick. I'm 1'8", 6 feet. So over here I'm 60 kilograms, and over here I'm 80 kilograms. Like, this is like earlier today, and this is just a few years ago. And I remember, like, walking into the office. This is COVID, and one of my staff members was there, and she started crying when she looked at me. She's like, "You look sick," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's all like, "You need to quit this job. Like, you know, you are not handling the way these white people are treating you." And so, like, and I made a deal with my therapist. Everyone, if you don't have a therapist, please get one. Please get one. I made a deal with my therapist, and he said, if you get below 60 kilograms or get below 135 pounds, you have to quit that day. So the day I got below that, I, like, turned in my resignation letter. And then, like, a month later, I was like 10 kilograms higher. But, like, this is like the real personal effect. Like, you know, like it's hard. And, like, you know, when you're sitting there and I remember, like, my kid, oh, I'm gonna cry. So, like, I remember my kid, like, wasn't laughing, and I was like, oh, I'm not laughing. Like, you know, like, I have this little baby, and I'm, like, very smiley and happy. And then I noticed my kid hadn't laughed in a few days, and I'm like, it's because I'm not happy. And then, of course, like, you know, when you have kids, you fake it. I started laughing like I was, like, you know, making it up and da. But you keep doing these things because as a single parent, you have to make sure you're the person on the right and not the person on the left. So just real quick, progress for whom? We have advancements where we come to these meetings. We have, like, oh, we have implants coming. We have injectables coming. We have this coming. We have PrEP coming. The first time I presented at the International AIDS Conference, it was like 2012. PrEP wasn't approved in the US yet. And I said, when it was approved, it's only going to be white gay men. And then surprise, surprise, 10 years later, it was only white gay men who had access to PrEP. And so, like, what we see is that when we get advancements, Black people are going to have a higher level of disparity. And then we have a higher level of disparity, like the work that you're doing, trying to make sure we have some equity and resources. It's like when the blacker this issue becomes, the more the money is pulled away. And I keep saying that over and over again, but we're going to really have that intersectional conversation, because when this becomes just about Africa and Black people in Brazil, when I promise you, like when he's going to have to be working triple time, and that's, like, it's not realistic, it's not fair. Next slide. So I think many of you in the US know my role in trying to make sure that, like, we had an equitable selection process for the PEPFAR coordinator. Because at one point, like, we were at the final, like, you know, the word, like, you know, we all know who the finalists are. And we're like, so the finalists are 3 white cis people? And we're like, that doesn't make any sense. And so you start having that conversation, like, we have to push, we have to make sure that we're going to have equity in hiring processes, because even when you looked at the group of people who are making that decision, it was disgusting from my from my point of view. So this is here's my child. um, but when I think of like what the end of HIV will look like, it's going to be Black, and Black is beautiful, Black is powerful, Black is bold.
Thank you so much, Ace, and that's why you are my friend. Can we bring up our panelists? Yeah. All right. But I want to just take up some of the things that you've mentioned. One around relatability, whether these faces in leadership we can relate to. But importantly is the cost of leadership. And when, oh, there she is, Tabitha. I also want to recognize you, my leadership. Yes. When Tabitha asked me to moderate the session, I said I wanted it to be real. I wanted us to feel. When we were in Montreal, we were dealing with the theories and the hard stuff, and you know, starting to have this conversation at the AIDS conference every 2 years. And I said to Tabitha, I want it to be real. I want people to see the cost of some of the bullshit, right? Some of our friends do not want to wake up to go to work because of whiteness. Some women do not want to go to work because we are constantly expected to have an agenda that is not feminist. Our feminist agendas is not put through our work because we are expected to act like white men. So I'd like to call up, why are you guys not clapping? Are you worried? In South Africa, second lady, we have something called Go Deeper, Papa. You must warn them. We are going to go deeper. On our panel, we have Ben Plumley, Tumi, as well as Vincent. Can you come and take the stage, please? Am I missing another panelist? Renata, are you going to come to the front? All right. So I'm going to go straight in because we'd like to hear from the people who are in this room as well. Ben, from the perspective of a white man, what has been the impact of racism and intersecting dynamics of racism and gender discrimination on global health and the international development?
Thanks, Yvette. So I think the way that I'm going to answer that question is sort of really immensely personal. It sort of comes from a perspective of someone who has devoted their life from, I guess, the time I sort of began to know myself as a teenager and began to understand kind of the impacts of racism on my values, my beliefs, someone who came really from a colonizer's family very, very directly to someone who then has devoted their career to global AIDS. Well, my message up front is that we are a spectrum of conflicting attitudes, behaviors, and norms. It's acquired, it's instilled. It's not unique to the West. We can see it in South and East Asia. We can even see it in some African countries that were rudely and cruelly brought together by colonizers themselves. But it is a particular challenge for us in the West. And it's especially difficult for those of us working in development because we hold the levers of power, funding, and authority, and we shouldn't. From a leading American scientist back in the early 2000s, who admittedly was slightly taken out of context, who said that it was a waste of time to give Africans ARVs because they didn't know how to tell the time, to perhaps the more pernicious attitudes that exist today in donors, in NGOs, in development agencies. And this, I think, I really resonated what Dr. Khan was saying. I've seen and heard this. Indeed, I've probably said it myself many times. But you know, the attitudes that we're imposing additional reporting requirements on African NGOs because they don't have the capacity or the experience to manage funds, or they don't know how things really work, and we don't want to upset the people who give us money. You know, we have to recognize, we white people working in development, and particularly HIV, we need to understand that we come to the table with a very incomplete and subservient set of insights and expertise. Indeed, our mindset must be that it is us who are being invited to the table, not the other way around. I would say we have racism instilled in us from birth. Sure, empire is over. Sure, slavery is over. But and it's sort of quite appropriate that here we are in Europe, here we are in Germany, that is particularly struggling with these issues today. We have a deep-seated belief in our politics, our behaviors, our beliefs. We believe in our superiority, and we believe we have a deep fear of the unknown, of other societies, and that drives us. Do you know, at breakfast today, there was a young group of women, I think from Kenya, who were being chaperoned by two older British women. And one of the older women said to the younger women, right, who's coming to the plenary with me? Come on, we've got to go now. And they're like, oh, God, and no, come on, we've got to meet afterwards. And, you know, we've got to show to the funders that we're on top of this and we're doing. And yeah, okay. And eventually she went off to her plenary, and the other young women were there. And so it strikes me that this conference is in service of people on the front lines, learning, sharing, and leading. It's not the other way around. So I know you're going to want me to shut up, and I'm going to be very brief now, but and the last thing I want to do is to be talking, believe me. We do have to move the centers of power, authority, and accountability to the front lines. Yes, there are issues with governments in every part of the world, and they all have their challenges with transparency, corruption, and accountability. But just look what's happening in Kenya, look, Bangladesh, South Africa. We know it can be done. On a very personal level, I tried something as a CEO of a nonprofit in 2018. I was the CEO of Pangea Global AIDS. It made no sense for us to be headquartered in Oakland, California, with all the overheads. So we took a really tough decision to close down, and the Asian work was led by the really brilliant activist and Frontline AIDS Linking Organization member, Thomas Kai at AIDS Care China. That's now evolved and is in Cambodia and Vietnam. And Pangea lives on under the incredible leadership of Zimbabweans in Harare, across the country, as PZAT, an organization you will know very well and who is led by the incredible Imelda Mahaka. So it can be done. And I think bilateral and private funders are where we have the most work. They're the ones saying, oh, can you really write reports? Can you really be accountable? And I would say that my home country, I'm American and British, but my home country, the UK, has a lot of catching up to do after the absolutely crippling and disastrous ripping of the development budget. Yeah, Winnie, you know how I feel about that. And I would say that I think picking up from what Ace was saying, it is broader than HIV, although we are on the front line. I would say that I think there is going to be a reckoning about the UK's legacy of empire. People say to me, oh, but it's our money and we have to be accountable to the British taxpayer. Yes, but where did that money and that economic might come from over the last 2 centuries?
Can we give Ben a round of applause? And And importantly, the discussion that we are not having is the one around money and power. Who wants to lose money and power? And the decolonization discussion cannot be co-opted because we cannot expect our colonizer to decolonize us. My next question is to me, how is Frontline Aid advancing anti-racism in healthcare, and what are some of the decolonizing approaches for equitable treatment and prevention have you observed or undertaken as an organization?
Thank you, Yvette. The deal was you were not going to ask me a difficult question, but I think we've already forgotten that deal. So when I was preparing for this, I was very anxious because I wasn't sure how to present. And one of my colleagues called me last night and she reminded me and she said, the only way you can present is in your authentic self. And the only voice you'll ever have is your voice. And so I come here, I suppose, humbled in that being able to be in this room and have these difficult conversations is possibly something I've been prepared for. And for those that don't know me, I'm a program manager at Frontline AIDS. I've been entrusted with running a precious program for young people. And the reason why I say entrusted is because Black practitioners like me, we're not programming for populations in another world. We're programming for ourselves. For many practitioners like me, we are a paycheck away from being a program beneficiary. Our children are a parent away from being in an OVC program. So the lived realities of who we are in the global development space from a decolonization lens is one that I want to underscore because often people like me are not interested to be able to program for people like me. And I don't say this lightly, but I also wanted to recognize that also people like me have been mentored by other women, the same women who have to go through resilience building all the time. And so in the work that I do, I would like to create moments of softness because I think it is unfair that Africans continue to be seen only through a resilience lens. We're tired of being resilient. And so when we think about doing development differently in the work that we do at Frontline AIDS, for me, it's not just about seeing our population in terms of the HIV status. Yes, we do so much work to ensure that HIV adherence is done right. We do so much work to ensure that communities are being reached in ways that matter to them. But I also think it's imperative that we create moments of softness for our communities because the very nature of colonization is that we are always the struggle heroes, the ones that are toying. And I think it's only fair that we also create spaces and moments of dialogue that reflect the softness that we all deserve so much. And so when the conversation around decolonization started for us at Frontline 8 years ago, there were quite a few intersecting things that were happening at the time. Yes, it was the George Floyd moment, but it was also at a time when Frontline AIDS was also grappling with a changing personnel as more and more, and intentionally so, as more of us joined Frontline AIDS, it became imperative to have the difficult conversations. And the difficult conversations around belonging, the difficult conversations around, do we have the right tone to speak on behalf of Frontline AIDS? I know for one, I have balked at the idea of representing Frontline AIDS in many occasions because I was quite cognizant that maybe my tone was not the correct tone. But again, it's that reminder that we can only ever be who we are. And so Frontline AIDS began a series of investments, I'd like to call it. First up was recognizing that there needed to be a dialogue, moments of conversations among staff to discuss the impact of colonization, to discuss the impact of imperialism, to discuss the impact of whiteness in the spaces that we occupy. Secondly, there was an idea around creating safe spaces for people of color and Black people in the organization. And those spaces, when they were created initially, they were meant to be spaces for safety and comfort. And then there was what I'd like to call an undertaking by our leadership that they would sponsor moments of decolonization in ways that the organization knew how. But we did not get it right. And I think for me, the biggest part about not getting things right is that it allows you moments to learn. And what have we learned so far? Firstly, that at an individual level, organizations, institutions need to first foreground the people that are in the institutions. It should be easy that all of us find our faces in the organizations that we work for and that we feel and have a sense of belonging. And so when we discuss issues around equity, pay equity, benefits, and so forth, it actually reminded me of something that Ace said around how Black leadership or Black excellence is often defined. It's not good enough that as a Black person, you're excellent. You have to prove yourself beyond doubt and even show that you can carry a train on your head while at it. We also recognized at Frontline Ace that there was some work that we needed to do at an intrapersonal level. A lot of the times in these conversations, we hear about allyship. But I have a problem with allyship because for so many of us, allyship is as simple as deciding when to step in and when to step out. But for those with lived realities of what this means, we never get a moment to step out. And so I'd like to leave, a thought to the people in the room that, are you really an ally if you walk out of this room and you forget about the conversations that have happened? At an institutional level at Frontline Ace, we recognize that for change to be effective, we would need to also look at policies, because it's one thing to use a badge of decolonization, but it's something else to structurally change. And so we are now looking at what kind of policies need to change, because pay equity cannot be lip service. A global NGO has to follow through. And in order for it to follow through, it has to do so by doing some really deep, hard work around policy change. And finally, Frontline Aids were positioned very well globally. And I think that is the moment of privilege that many of us need to acknowledge. But what kind of conversations are we at Frontline Aids having in spaces that we get to occupy? The reason why when I started speaking and I spoke about the work that I do is that even though as a Black woman in this space, I have privilege. So my privilege is running programs for Black children and Black young people, because in that moment, much as I could be disenfranchised in many other spaces, but the moment where I get to decide how programs are run for communities, it's me recognizing the privilege that I have. And so for me, it's really important that much as we are struggling with so much, we need to also reflect on moments where we are able to effect that change. And I'd just like to end with something around, again, I think I could, a lot of what Ace said resonated with me. Throughout my career, one of the things that has been said sometimes is that, oh, I wish Tumi smiled a little bit more in meetings. And I want to talk about the currency of smiles for Black professionals. As a Black professional, you get judged on whether you smiled enough. And people don't understand that when you're fighting bread and butter issues, a smile is the last thing you're thinking about. And so I say this because it's really interesting how in the global health space, Blackness is treated. We should be happy, we should do cartwheels, even when we're faced with so much work, underpaid, and dealing with so much more. And I think we need to be very honest about these conversations, because ultimately, if we're not, we will never be able to discuss what needs to happen.
Can we give Tumi a round of applause? Also to say, every time a white leader or white man is replaced in a position, it's always difficult to find a Black woman with lived experiences, because we sometimes are not too relatable to the funder. Vincent Your quote in relation to this conversation is Coalition Plus is committed to implementing DEI measures for employees and beneficiaries. While useful, these are insufficient against rising blatant racism. We need an international mobilization and everyone's commitment. A good start is UNAIDS uniting all stakeholders in a global project with a roadmap by 2030. In your opinion, what would be a pivotal milestone of this roadmap, and how would they impact the lives of people living with HIV?
Thank you very much, and thank you, UNAIDS, for the invitation, and I hope you are having a good conference so far. Honestly, when I was invited to participate to this panel, I wonder what I would have to tell you. I'm a white man living in France, and this is very important for what I'm going to tell you just after. I define myself as a gay man, and I'm the director of a network of organizations working in 55 countries, but still the executive director of this network is a white man from France. And this is important for what I'm going to say after. Wait a little bit. Of course, we've had within Coalition Plus conversations on DEI and policies and all we could do to evolve, to change. But at some point, we need the whole environment to evolve, and we need some global organizations such as UNAIDS to help us set goals, to help us have data, and to help us follow those data and monitor those data. I was very happy to listen to Ace's speech on who has access to PrEP. This is what we see everywhere. Who has access to frequent HIV and STI testing? Who has access to frequent, who has access to HIV treatments and to PrEP? There are strong inequalities between regions, countries, and populations. And we need UNAIDS and other global organizations to help us spotlight those inequalities and to set goals and to challenge them. What UNAIDS do help us in our countries, in our advocacy, and it's very helpful. Because it's very helpful to tackle how racism is actively impacting the HIV epidemic. That's about data and leadership from global organizations such as UNAIDS is very important. Then I would like to talk about money. Today, distribution of funds is very bad. We need the money to go as close to the field, as close to the people as possible. But look at the money where it is at the moment, the retrocession rate of organizations. When you look at $100, how much of this money goes to the people who need that money? You have donors, then the Global Fund, then you have intermediary organizations, then principal recipient, then sub-recipient, etc., etc. And then on $100, what goes to populations? The population needed that money. And I would like to share with you one thing that my colleague Serge is here, who said in a very powerful speech. He said, the question is not about associating people around the table. It's about who owns the table and where is the table of negotiation. And the table of negotiation needs to be transferred to where people are, where the HIV epidemic is. And in our conversation about decolonization, it's about all that. And we need to get rid of all those intermediary organizations with strong overhead that is shifting money out of the people. In Coalition Plus, we've been looking at that retrocession rate, and my colleague told me, oh, we have a 70% retrocession rate. I was, wow, that's very low. And she said, but look at some other organizations, sometimes it's 30%, which means on $100, only 30% of that money goes to the people in the field. That needs to change, and UNAIDS can play a strong role in helping us monitoring that kind of thing. We can discuss about decolonization, racism, but we need goals, we need data, and we need to monitor that and to set goals about that so the situation change. I would be very hypocritical if I would ask UNAIDS to help us change, and if I would talk about racism and decolonization without doing some introspection myself. As I told you, I'm a white gay man living in France. I'm French. And I think a global network like Coalition Plus need to have some other leader. That's why my commitment and the commitment I made to my team is that I will step down. I will step down not just to step down. I will step down to leave the space, leave the room to someone coming from a region where HIV has a high prevalence, someone from communities. And this is something global leaders need to think about. Who is leading the fight against HIV? When you look at the sociology of people leading the fight against HIV, there are too many white people. And some people like me just need to step down. We will survive change. The world will survive decolonization. So just commit.
Thank you so much. And now, yeah, you remind me of something that I used to say, is that sometimes we sit at tables we are supposed to flip because our ancestors keep nudging us. You're not supposed to do that. Flip that thing. And we are sitting at those tables. Now we're getting into the part where we engage with everyone in the room. We're going to take a few hands because we still have a big part of our program that we need to cover. So anyone would like to engage with our panelists? Questions? Do we have the mic? So panelists, you listen to the question and you will respond if the question's directed to you. And comments and inputs, because we'd like to hear from you.
My question is to all the panelists, no one in specific, so they can all take that. I'm seated here as a young woman, a Kenyan, and I'm thinking in my head how many times I've been invited to a room and we're discussing about issues affecting young women in the rural Kenyan society, and the room is full of funders who are white, older, men, and sometimes women, 2 or 3. And I'm thinking, how are we going to come up with strategies that actually speak to these young women if these young women are not the ones that are coming up with these strategies? Just because that's where the money is, so they get to be the one that decide what goes to these women, despite the fact that it might not necessarily be what they actually need. And I'm also thinking about one of the things that make me very uncomfortable, especially in the programming, being a young programmer. And I've been in meetings with PEFA where they're talking about HIV testing yields. And I'm thinking, we are not yields, we're not crops, we're human beings. That percentage that you're thinking about it as a crop is a child somewhere, is a woman somewhere. So we need to start decolonizing even the terminologies that we use in the HIV programming, because that is where the problem actually starts. Because if you're addressing someone as a yield, that's just as much as they'll see themselves as a yield. And that's as much as you'll see me as. Because to you, I'm not a human being. I'm just a yield. I'm just a crop. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was a lost to found at some point. There's another question at the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Labode, former member of parliament for Zimbabwe. I'm a little bit confused because on the other side of me, I'm a business person and I have smaller businesses out in the outskirts. When we give them money, we send them money Because I was hearing here somebody saying accountability should or monitoring should not come from the funder. Let the smaller organization monitor themselves and do as they wish. Even in a government, when you give $20 to a district, you follow the $20 to go and know what it did. That is an international standard. So I want to know, please, maybe I'm confused. How are you decolonizing yourself from yourself? Because sometimes colonization is in your mind. If you think Self-Aid has given you 1 million and you don't want to be asked what you have done with it, buy yourself a nice Mercedes-Benz, do whatever you want to do. As long as you are Black and you're in Africa, it's okay. You know, it's wrong. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that input. One last question at the back, and I'll ask my panelists to respond.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch your name at Coalition Plus. Vincent, sorry. Okay, so I just want to ask the question because I don't want to make an assumption about, sort of what you meant, but I will sort of make my assumption in the second part of this so I don't speak too long, which is just kind of what do you mean when you say money going to the people in the field? Because it sounded a bit like there was a conflation of kind of salary and maybe some other costs. And the reason why I asked that question is because, at least in South Africa, the average, Black person's salary is paying for 12 different people. Right. And I feel like when we use the term community, we're sort of ghettoizing certain people and then separating staff and people working in organizations. So for me, paying professional people who happen to be Black and who happen to be from the community, where we're working, I'm not really seeing a difference between the two. So I don't want to assume that's what you meant, but that's why, I'm asking the question.
Thank you so much. Is there one last question? Okay.
Oh, I have one.
Okay.
Hi. Sorry. And it's a little bit of a comment and a little bit of a challenge. When we talk about the fact that more money has to go to and be spent in countries most affected by HIV, by people with most expertise, one of the things that as organizations predominantly based in the global north, we're not really willing to do is concede that will have to mean that the amount of money we take in goes down. And at the minute, our leadership structures and our boards are heavily driven by growth. And when your income comes down even a tiny bit, that is perceived as a failure. And yet many organizations in that position, getting that message from their leadership, are also the same ones advocating in global spaces for more money to go to communities. And we need to get right into the root of how we measure success in our organizations, because it's not going to be by growth, it's going to be by scaling down. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. We have a question online from Yumna Hattas. Can we unmute Yumna to ask a question?
Hi, thanks, Yvette. Nice seeing you all. Ben, Tumi, everybody. Nice seeing you. I wish I was there. I just want to give you all a hug and just start toying, me, Tumi. Anyway, my question is, we spend most of the time that we should be on decolonizing our organizations and institutions managing white fragility. And I want to ask the question, how do we shift this power away from focusing on white fragility, but rather to the lived experience and what needs to be done? Thanks.
Thank you so much. So panelists, you each one have got 1.5 minutes to answer to that. Yes.
So quickly, the individual from Zimbabwe, you spoke to a different way to decolonize the work that you're doing internally. I'll just give one solution. I'm very solution focused. The programs that I've created that are community-led oversight means that the community was there at the beginning to design the program. It wasn't designed by the public health officials. It was designed by the community. They came with their own metrics to say like what is success and what is failure and what are we going to do if there is failure. And then those same individuals or individuals that they selected as the community-led organizations or community-led oversight group they're the ones who are going to look at the product and say if it's done appropriately. And having that shared responsibility has been very helpful to make sure that there's no problems with the leadership of the organization or anyone else who was involved with developing a program. There are some really great individuals in this room who have done very similar things. I see Andre Millette here from LA, who's done the same work in his field, who can give you suggestions of what does it look like to have a solution focus. And that other piece, I probably should give the mic to Winnie. So when we're talking about what does it look like to have the work on addressing white fragility. Addressing white fragility is going to be very clear. You just dive right in. Like, what are we going to do about these boards? What are we going to do about the hiring managers? Because if you're going to keep hiring individuals who have a history of having poor responses for serving communities, then what are you doing? So just like you have to really say you can fire the board. Many of us have been in these situations where you have to just say the board's not appropriate. We need to change it. And if you're not changing it, we have to fire you because I care more about the people sitting in my waiting room than I care about in my boardroom. It's that simple.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. For clarification, what I was saying is that, yeah, today, money that goes to solidarity, there is a high level of retention of that money in Western countries, in Europe, in North America. And that money should be going to frontline organizations, national frontline organizations, the one created by local activists, local people who want to do things. But nowadays, a high level of that money still goes to big international NGOs with their headquarters being in the United States or in Europe. And that must be changing. And what I mean by frontline organizations, it's organizations who work closely to the communities with hard to reach populations, with peer educators. And I benefit from having the microphone to say that at Coalition Plus we are advocating strongly to recognize the role of peer educators and have peer educators as being a true, genuine job with people have a normal salary and not just fees to go in the field. So that's what I meant by having money in the field.
Yeah. To me, Ben?
Do I still have I'll respond to Joan's question about where are the young women in the conversation. I cannot answer that question in any smart way, other than the fact that for young women to occupy spaces and lead conversations, it is up to us to create opportunities for young women to be in the conversations and lead the spaces. And often we forget. And when I started, I mentioned that for me to have been in these spaces is because other women put me up or put me on. And it then becomes imperative that when we occupy these spaces, we are paying attention to who else we should bring into the room. And when we need to move, one of the panels I led this week, I was reminded that I'm now on the other side of the intergenerational dialogue. And humbling as that was, I thought it was a really important reminder. I've had all week to take it in. I wasn't as graceful on Monday, but today I am, because it should be that the next conference, the next meeting, the next gathering around decolonization is led by women like Joan and not me. And I think for me, that's what always matters, is that even in moments of opportunity that Black people have, we have the responsibility to create more room. What often happens is we want to be the only Black at the table, and there's no honor in being the only Black at the table. Ours and our responsibility is to create spaces for more of us to be represented.
Thank you. Malia is online and would like to make a contribution. Ben, I'm going to ask Malia to speak first.
Sure. Just a quick intervention. You know, the question about how do we move from just dealing with white fragility, and I think the point there is to move away from individuals, right? I think too often our conversation gets bogged down with, you know, people reflecting on their own experience, and what they might have done and said. And the point isn't what they've done and said, right? Individuals are not responsible for the, you know, hundreds of years of colonization and racism that exists, but it is to move to the systems. And there, I think you start to get to the point of actually true transformation of organizations where power starts to shift. And therefore, then you can move away from the sort of, you know, conversations where a few people cry, feel bad about their own, you know, sort of heritage, which they can't change in any case. But then they're able to not actually transform power within the organization and shift it within the sector. And to me, that is deeply disturbing because that's a lot of tears for absolutely no reason whatsoever.
Okay, thank you so much. Ben, do you want to make an intervention?
Just very briefly on boards, I think those are areas of major attention. I'm on the boards of an international organization and a local San Francisco organization that actually ACE has had a lot of collaboration and work with. And I feel that boards need a fundamental rethink in terms of who is on them, the governance responsibilities, and we need to be as thorough in hiring board members as we do any of our staff.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I would like to recognize the young person from Kenya, the Gen Z Joan. Everybody should be scared in this room. Kenyans did a thing over there. Alrighty. We are going to go into the next part. Thank you so much, panelists. You are excused. We are going to have Renata talk to us about colonization and its impact on social determinants of health in the Pacific, a Fijian perspective, historical legacies, present-day disparities, and pathways to equality. Over to you, Renata.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Anisa Mbulavinaka, everyone, and warm Pacific greetings. So I actually work for UNAIDS in the Fiji office, but today I'm standing here proudly as a non-Indigenous Pacific Islander and a person who is a fourth-generation Indian living in Fiji and a byproduct of colonialism. On most global discussions and what we've heard from our panelists so far, we're not talking about other countries affected. So I really want to give an insight on what it's like in the Pacific. Because colonialism and racism is often not discussed, especially in a health perspective. So today I hope to educate and to share and to add a call to action from my lived experience and those of other Pacific Islanders. To understand the present, we need to look back at the past. So I will be focusing on Fiji in this particular instance. Fiji's colonial history under the British rule started from 1874 to 1970. And this really reshaped our society. Colonial policies led to significant land disposition for indigenous Fijians and the establishment of the indentured labor system. From 1879 to 1916, Indian laborers, those are my ancestors, were brought to Fiji to work on sugarcane plantations. These laborers endured harsh working conditions, poor living standards, and widespread exploitation. This period not only left a legacy of social and economic hardship, but also introduced new ethnic dynamics and tensions which really persists to some extent today. We've had racially driven coups in 1987 and also in the year 2000. And this is all within my lifetime. Race is the card still used by politicians today. The introduction of Western medicine and health services during this era was often limited and discriminating towards indigenous Fijians. The colonial health infrastructure did not cater fairly to all communities, and disparities are creating really strong disparities that have long-lasting effects. Today, these historical injustices manifest in many forms. Indigenous populations in Fiji face a higher rate of NCDs, a direct result of socioeconomic conditions, a shift from traditional diets, and ill-advised medical criteria such as the body mass index, BMI. Whose body is that criteria based on? Definitely not a Pacific Islander. When discussing sexual reproductive health, it is essential to acknowledge the lingering impacts of colonial attitudes. Colonial policies often neglected or stigmatized sexual health, education, and services, creating a foundation of ignorance and taboo. So I want to give a few examples, especially within the health space, of how embedded colonialism is and all the effects that we are facing right now in the Pacific. Firstly, we, Pacific Islanders, Fijians, are never the experts of our own development. An expert from the global north would come with health policies and great initiatives to adapt or contextualize to the local, to Fiji or other Pacific Islands. And of course, to contextualize, you need to have local knowledge. This is something you cannot find out in 3 months during your short-term assignment in the country. And these experts are often paid 3 to 4 times more than a person who is qualified, a local person who is qualified with similar qualifications. And this is the starting of the failure of our policies and programs, because it doesn't consider cultural aspects, nor does it take into account local considerations. Now, specific to the HIV space, right now, Fiji is the second fastest growing epidemic in the Asia Pacific region. Young people are dying from AIDS, with death rates almost doubling in the past few years. The epidemic response is something that you have seen in the 1990s. AIDS is visible. We have doctors in the room who can tell you firsthand that people come with AIDS-related symptoms. However, a 3-hour flight away from Fiji is Australia, and Australia is nearing its elimination of HIV. So this speaks a lot of volumes. Australia is also Fiji's biggest donor for development, and this also dictates Fiji's health budgets and programs. The withdrawal of funds by Australia and New Zealand about a decade ago led to weaker HIV programs, as donors picked up other areas of priority which governments had to focus on. The fragility of the Pacific, especially around sexual health, provides no room for neglect, and thus we are in the situation that we are in now. On the other hand, we have a drug crisis. And this drug crisis has been fueled as the Fiji and the Pacific acts as a transit point to Australia and New Zealand, to more profitable markets. But now there's a local market that has been created within these Pacific Island countries, and this is fueling our HIV epidemic. And unfortunately, we do not have any infrastructure to manage people who use drugs. I could go on with a lot more examples, but I've been told I've only got 1 minute left. But, sometimes it's really hard to connect the impacts of colonialism to present day realities. And this is because it's so ingrained in us and accepted as normal. And like Tumi said, resilience is a word that's used to describe Pacific Islanders as well. But we're just trying to survive. Resilience is our survival mechanism. And I want to emphasize that this is not normal to have unequal opportunities, increased vulnerabilities, or limited access to health just because of what citizenship we have or where we are in the world. Continuing to accept this is disregarding the struggles of our ancestors. And let me say that decolonialization is not an anti-white campaign, but rather a process of healing of generations before us. International cooperation plays a pivotal role in supporting Fiji and the Pacific's efforts towards health, equity, and sustainable development. And we really need to incorporate local expertise and meaningful change. I'm glad to say, I'm putting on my UNAIDS hat here, that Australia has donated $2.6 million towards the HIV response in Fiji. And we hope to use this opportunity to learn from our past and decolonize our approach to this support. So we do not have a repetition of another HIV epidemic or another health problem that we'll see 10 years from now. So Binaka, and thank you so much for your time. And if you want to learn more about Fiji, we can have a conversation after this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that educational piece, Renata. And now we have the pleasure to hear from the Executive Director of UNAIDS, Winnie Byanyima. We call her sister because she's a feminist. We call her leader because she's leading us and we are following. Winnie Byanyima, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Yvette. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Second Lady of South Africa. Thank you for joining us. It's truly an honor to join this conversation. Yesterday, I took a little time off and went to visit a center, which is a museum, really. And it is a museum here downtown. It would be good to, if you have time to go there, but it puts out there the whole history of the Nationalist Workers' Party of Germany. That is Hitler's party, how it grew out of the impact of the First World War on this country, this great country, how it grew to become what it became, and to commit a genocide that was the greatest tragedy of the last century. You get the whole story there. And I said to myself, I have to go to see this. German people have decided that never again, but we will not forget what happened here. Our people participated in this horror. So they put it there right in the center of their town, of their city. And when I was looking at who's coming, who's watching this, I saw, actually, I think I was the only Black person there during the 2-3 hours I was there. There were white women with their children. There were old men with like grandchildren. There were young people in groups, white people coming to see and to remember. And that's great. It's important to remember how we came to be where we are and the horrors of racism. Then a few months ago, I was in Zanzibar. I went, every time I'm in Zanzibar, there's a stop I never miss to make. And that is at a museum of slavery. It is there in Tanzania, in Zanzibar. you get there the history of the Arab slave trade on the East African coast into the interior that led to that Zanzibari culture, which is really a mixture of our people, Bantu people, and the Arab people who came, colonized, enslaved. What you see there again is the people of Tanzania saying, we must remember there was a horror here and it must never happen again. Then I ask myself, how come we don't see a slavery museum in London? How come we don't see a slavery museum in all these European cities, in America? America, maybe they have in some cities. Because people don't want to remember. People don't want to be accountable for it, right? Governments don't want to be accountable for 400 years of slavery and 100 years of colonialism, 500 years of domination and exploitation. They don't want to remember. But these cities are built by the lives of those slaves, yeah? By the wealth of the countries in the South. So to me, remembrance, facing up to the history is the beginning of addressing racism. For us in our institutions, it's about us accepting that there is this history of exploitation and it shapes our systems, our policies, and the culture of our institutions, and to address it at all those levels. I was so impressed by Malia, Women Deliver, and how she presented the 3 areas at which they are working, and the hardest one being that one of changing the systems, the way we operate. But I must say, the culture is also hard to change. See, but you need to work at all those levels in an institution if you're going to uproot racism. Now, it's 2 years since we had the first discussion, and I've insisted that we are going to have it every time we come together in this space. Because, like so many of the speakers have said, our health is shaped by these inequities, including racism, homophobia, sexism, capitalism. All these things shape our health. And let's accept it. I think Ace said it. He showed us the data there. This is our disease. 75% of people living with HIV are people who look like me. Hey, it's our disease. And the more it is our disease, the more it is parked. The solutions become less and less. So how can we fight to end it without naming the elephant in the room? We have to name the elephant in the room. Racism. If you hear that resources are being cut, every month or so I get another donor coming, smiling, but also crying, some kind of crocodile tears. We have had to reprioritize. We are reprioritizing. Can you find a way to do this work differently? How? With less money, do it differently. So, and you say, where have you prioritized? If you have reprioritized us out, you will find that it is going to themselves, right? Themselves. So the question is there, should we name it and say that why are these lives less important? Why have you suddenly prioritized something else? Is it about people who are more important? So putting the race issue on the table is so important, but it is hard, I must tell you. When I call it out, I'm a troublesome person. That's the thing. This is what you call white fragility. They are fragile. You must not tell them the truth. If you tell them the truth, you are hurting them and you are difficult. So let me come to what we're trying to do at UNAIDS. Well, in the or broadly in the UN, our Secretary General is serious on the issue. I'm happy to be his follower and one of his aides, because he does care about the issue and want to fight it. He's taken steps. He's appointed a senior advisor at the highest level to be his advisor, a very credible woman from South Africa. He has put a team in place. Not a lot of resources. We are all struggling in the UN, but what you need to get started to work on this. And he talks about the issue. He's a champion of the issue. So that's good. We at UNAIDS, yeah, we also started. We said we are going to go on a journey of intersectional anti-racist feminism. Yes, we made our framework and we had our challenges. We have a lot of men in the organization who said, but what is this feminism? We had to explain and explain what we mean. We had to say to them, this is not about gender as a binary concept. We are intersectional. We accept that gender is fluid. We also understand that there's class cutting through and race, and that is the feminist lens we have. And we said every unit must show us how it is living the feminist principles we put on the table. So every little unit has its framework for driving this feminist agenda. And we hold each other accountable for this. My team, which is a cabinet with Angeli, with Christine, we have our feminist values, commitments, and we come forward. All of us have to come and say, what have we done this year to drive our agenda? That's our commitment. And we put money there. We put money there. Just like how people wanted us to mainstream gender with air, no money. And we fought for resourcing when we still fight for resourcing. The same. Our feminist approach has to be resourced. But let me come to the point on accountability where it becomes difficult. And that's because my sister from Zimbabwe raised it. You see, when we said decolonize this notion of accountability, this is what we mean. If accountability is that the donor who has money, who is a rich country, wants to know how the money from the taxpayers of his country has been spent, and will put there, will ask you to have someone who monitors fraud. You put them there. Once another person who monitors sexual exploitation and abuse, you put them there. Once another one who will monitor aid diversion. It must not go to terrorists. You put them there. Now, that budget is given you, more and more of it is going to his accountability. Less and less is going to serve the people. Then you ask the question, where is the accountability to the people? Where is that accountability? Because you've brought money, whether it's a loan or it is a gift, but in the name of these people, how do you account to them for the money you've brought? There's nothing there. There's no accountability to the people. As long as the donor has their accountability, that is colonization. That is what we mean. We have, and I'm calling out Global Fund today. I'm calling them out. We have something that has come from the HIV movement called community-led monitoring. This is the communities demanding the services they want. This is about key populations saying, we are gay men, this is what works for us. We are trans women, we are people who inject, this is what we want. This is so important to have a voice to shape the services and to tell the service providers whether they are doing it right. Now, when you have a global fund that says, we have an intermediary, here is the money, go and do the program, they are giving the government the money, they are saying go and do, or an intermediary who's going to implement the services, and they say to them, and also choose the one who will monitor you. What is that accountability? How can you choose the one who will monitor you? You choose your friend who will tell you that you've done well. So, I mean, this is how they do their community. This is what they do, how they do their community-led monitoring. They pass the money on, and the intermediary who is implementing chooses the one who will do the community-led monitoring. That's one way. I'm saying to Global Fund, you are not doing community-led monitoring like that. You're just playing games with the money. If you want it to happen, then you must have some other way, the communities themselves maybe find a way that they will choose who is going to do the community-led monitoring, but not you choosing who will monitor you. The same with PEPFAR does it a little better, but still you find that they've still got access to the monitors, the communities that are monitoring, and they're able to tell them, don't do this, hire this one, do this. This is just colonialism. This is colonialism. They have to be here. Communities must be able to do this supervision and have their voice that is not interfered with, but the one who has brought the money, because that's the one they are monitoring. They are monitoring government, they are monitoring donors on how the money that is meant for them is being spent, and whether services are giving them the dignity that is their right. So we have decolonization for me in our work starts there by letting communities speak their authentic voice about what is being done in their name. So my sister, so accountability isn't about those communities are not trying to say, let us take the money and don't ask us what we are doing. No, but they are saying, give us the money and let us speak truth to power. Let us tell you exactly what we think. Don't follow us and make you a very nice report. This is what they are saying. It's about the horizontal accountability and the vertical one. The donor one is the vertical. The government one is the vertical. Government wants to know how its money has been spent. Fine. But if citizens don't tell it how they experience the services, that Auditor General's report, Parliament, Public Accounts Committee reports, fantastic, but they will not substitute for the voices of people themselves about how they experience the services from government. So we need vertical, we need horizontal accountability. Okay, so I want to leave that and one more point, and then I get off this table. This table, which we have said can be of who owns the table. So here we are. I had some data I wanted to share because it complements what Ace said about how this response needs to be decolonized. Here's the data. In Brazil, 2022, almost 63% of infections were among people, among Afro-descendants, 63%. Now, while AIDS deaths in that country were going down by 23% since 2011, 23% amongst white people, deaths were coming down. They were actually increasing amongst Afro-descendants by 9.6%. So if you talk the average, you'll say Brazil is improving because we are seeing decreases. But if you look at the picture from a racial lens, you will see progress for white people and new infections for Black people. In the United States, Black people account for 40% of people living with HIV, although they make up only 12% of the population. So the disease is mostly among them. I must also add, they are also poorer. As we have said, Africa is the home of half of the 9.3 million people living with HIV who are not on treatment. We keep talking about Africa making fastest progress, right? We say it's making fastest progress in reducing new infections. But the truth is that the other truth that we don't mention, and I'm mentioning now, is that half of the people who are not on treatment are in Africa. They are both truths. Sometimes our heads can't carry two truths at the same time, but we need to. We need to understand that still Africa is behind. There are more people living without being on treatment. So in closing, we have to put a race lens to global health. Whether we like it or we don't, the colonialism is following us. Even I can say slavery is still following us. We have to put a race lens. We have to name it. It's the elephant in the room in this, the race, the capitalist system, the fact that those with money who are white dominating the decision-making, the institutions are all sitting up there in the north, dominated by people from the north. We have to speak up about that, make people uncomfortable, don't mind the white fragility, say it politely with a soft voice, but say it as it is and address it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Amanda. Amanda. Yeah, you would not know South Africans are leading unless we say Amanda. Thank you so much for your contribution and your parting words, Winnie. I just have a few things to call us to order. I know we have to go, and I'd like to apologize to Dr. Leila on the line. I just want to say what I've heard is accountability. What I've also heard is that this needs to happen all the time, but not only at international conferences. Tabitha and all country officers must do this in the countries yearly so that we grow and we see some change. I don't want to leave without acknowledging the young people. When we work with young people, please, please take away your privilege. As a Black woman in leadership, I have a different privilege from the young person that I try to bring here. When we bring young people here, we can't hold the per diem until the last day. How are they traveling from Africa to here? How do they buy a bag? A big thing in this conferences is a bag. I want to say to my young person, I gave you that advance at the risk to say, what if you don't arrive? But I took a risk for a young person. That per diem needs to arrive before that young person sets foot on the plane. They need to buy a bag, they need to buy toiletries, they need to look the part when they are on these panels. So young people, I'm taking a risk for you. Also for us to say, we cut the agenda a little bit short. We need more time on this. We need more time. And UNAIDS, I challenge you again, 2.5 hours next time. The last time it was 1 hour. So thank you very much for your audience. A great session. And we will see you in your countries. Thank you so much, Tabitha. Thank you, UNAIDS. Thank you, leaders.